Welcome everybody to our new Tanya series. So excited to be here. I feel like making a bracha shehecheyanu. This was a dream for a long time, and I'm really excited that we're finally doing this. Just a few short notes before we begin. This is not, one of the reasons why I didn't do Tanya for a long time is because the Baruch Hashem is a wealth of recordings and translations and so much materials online and in Sfarim everywhere in so many different languages. So I just want to say that what we're going to be doing today is in no way a replacement for all the other resources. If you are new to the Tanya, then this is going to be a good introduction. I recommend there's a Sefer called Lessons in Tanya, which is a few volumes. It is a very, very accurate, detailed, wonderful translation of the Tanya, and that will be a really good companion to this series, because in our learning together, we're not going to be going through every single word in the Tanya, but doing the actual text in the Tanya with an accurate translation will be very, very helpful. So get that Sefer. It's called Lessons in Tanya. It's also available on Chabad.org online. You can just follow along with the chapters that we're doing here. You can follow along there on Chabad.org. Search up Lessons in Tanya. Another excellent resource is Rabbi Naftali Silberberg is a master teacher, and he has the entire Sefer HaTanya. All 53 prakim are online in wonderful classes on torahcafe.com. Search up on the series, Rabbi Naftali Silberberg's Tanya series. It is also on YouTube. Search up Rabbi Naftali Silberberg, Chapter 1, Tanya Chapter 1, and search by chapter. And you'll see there's sometimes 2 classes for every chapter, sometimes 3. It is so clear and beautiful and meaningful and a really, really good resource for anyone who wants to study the Tanya in depth. What we're going to be doing is add another thing and specifically explore how these ideas in the Tanya step guide for emotional wellness. So if you're listening now, you could get the outline to what we have. It's on the link on the chat. For those of you who are listening on the hotline, email to info@living.org, and I will, Be'ezras Hashem, send you the notes. That's info@energizedliving.org, not .com.org. And if you're back to YouTube, are linked in the description of the class. So let's jump right in. Okay. In the introduction to Sefer Tanya says that there's a pasuk in Chumash, it is very near, not just close, but very close to you to be able to fulfill the entire Torah all of the time, not just in your behavior, but also in your emotions. And the big question that the Baal HaTanya asks is, wow, what? So easy? It's so possible to fulfill all the mitzvahs all the time, really stay connected with Hashem all the time? And the entire Sefer is an answer to that question. The Baal HaTanya says he will answer a long way and a short way. The long way, in a nutshell, is that we can use our mind to generate emotion about Hashem in our hearts. And the short way is that we can activate our inherent willingness and courage to stay connected with them. Reb Yitzchak of Berditchev, in reviewing the Sefer, said, what a big Eibishter in such a small Sefer. Just a little book. It's a little book, and such a huge Eibishter in such a small Sefer. The praise for the Sefer is, we don't even have to begin talking about it. Let us jump right in to chapter 1. Just one more thought. Tanya is not Tylenol. It is not a quick fix. Although it is instantly inspiring and energizing, it's not a quick fix. Doing this work will give us a deeper healing and a deeper sense with our neshama, with Hashem, and inner security and strength that we can bring into our lives and to every single one of our relationships. Okay, we're going to begin in chapter 1. I am going to refer to Tanya text, but if you don't have one in front of you, that's fine. We're not doing the entire text inside. The beginning of Tanya begins with these words. Parak Aleph Tanya. We learn in Seif Parak Gimel Danida in the Gemara that mashpiyim oisai, before neshama comes down to the world, the neshama is made to swear, be a tzaddik, don't be a rasha, and even if the entire world says that you're a tzaddik, you should consider yourself a rasha. Now the Baal HaTanya has a bunch of questions about this. Doesn't it say in Pirkei Avos, Ba'al tihi rasha b'fnei atzmacha, do not consider yourself to be a rasha? So the overriding question of all of this is, what is the ideal way to view ourselves? Are we intended? Does the Torah want us? Does Hashem want us? Does Chazal inspire us and teach us to view ourselves as good people or bad people? Am I a good person or am I a bad person? Now, this is the opening question that Baal HaTanya says that he's going to answer all the questions, he's going to share all the answers to all the questions in this book. And it's very interesting that this, who am I? How should I see myself? Is the very first question. And the reason is because we naturally see ourselves at the center of our universe and we engage in our lives from that perspective. So the first message we want to remember and keep in mind is that when we change the way we see ourselves, we change everything in our entire life. One little thought that I meant to say in the beginning, while we're learning, I'm going to separate what's actually translated in, what's actually in the text and what's my own thought. So that idea of the fact that this is the opening question because we naturally see ourselves, at the center of our universe, that is my own, it doesn't say that directly in the Tanya. Okay, now the Baal HaTanya has a question. First of all, that it's a contradiction to what we know in Pirkei Avos. It says, don't consider yourself to be a bad person. Don't see yourself as a bad person. Another question he asks is, if you see yourself as a bad person, if you see yourself as a rasha, you will be sad. And when you're sad, you can't serve Hashem with joy. So the inherent statement in that is that it's not ideal. It's not the path to wholesome, energized living. It's not the path that takes us into the place where we want. It's not connecting us to Hashem. It's not ideal because the sadness makes it impossible to serve Hashem with joy. So then the Baal HaTanya introduces another possibility and he says, well, okay, so a person might say, fine, so I'll consider myself to be a rasha, but I won't be sad about it. I won't let it bother me. I'll get over it. I'll be above it. I'll put on a raincoat. It will slip right off my back. It's not going to bother me. Nothing. It's not going to impact me. To that, the Baal HaTanya says something very fascinating. He says, you know what? An attitude of it's bad, but I don't care is even worse than feeling sad. It is spiritually dangerous. And to this, the Baal HaTanya says, you could come to kalos, you could come to completely irreverence, you could come to a place of not caring at all. And to that, the Baal HaTanya says, chas v'shalom, meaning we know that it's not ideal, my own thoughts, we know that it's not ideal to serve, it's ideal to serve Hashem with joy. And the Baal HaTanya clearly tells us that feeling sad is a contradiction to our mandate to be joyous. Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, serve Hashem with joy. Joy is such a fundamental part of serving Hashem. So clearly feeling sad is a contradiction, but there's something even worse than feeling sad. And that is not feeling at all. In describing this possibility, the Baal HaTanya adds the words chas v'shalom, God forbid. Because, and I think this is my own thought here, as spiritually sensitive people, we appreciate the value of being joyous, right? And because we're determined to feel happy, I am going to be a happy person. Why? Because I believe in Hashem. If I'm a believer in Hashem, then I'm going to be happy because you're supposed to be happy. So then, if I take on that determination, if I make that resolution, that decision, I'm going to be happy, what might happen is that subconsciously, I may avoid opening my heart to the natural pain, frustration, and sadness that is a part of being human and it's part of being alive. We may think that it's holy to be unaffected by unpleasant realities. I'm going to be a person that's totally not impacted by the negativity, by sadness, by pain, by suffering. In these very first few lines of Tanya, the Baal HaTanya advises us that there's nothing holy about avoiding our messy emotions. A healthy person is supposed to feel sad when faced with a sad reality, right? If your heart doesn't feel bothered by this bothersome reality, by this objectively bothersome reality, you could come to irreverence. You could come to stop caring altogether, chas v'shalom. So rejecting or avoiding our unpleasant emotions is actually not holy. It is spiritually dangerous. Disrupting the natural connection between our mind and our heart can easily lead to emotional dysfunction. It can easily lead to us not caring, switching off our emotions altogether. That is far from where we want to go to. That depends, chas v'shalom. Now, throughout the Tanya, we are going to learn how to experience the full range of our emotions, even our unpleasant ones, our pain, our sadness, our self-hate, our tendency to all that stuff. We're going to learn tools for how to experience those emotions and process them from a position of strength and clarity, because definitely we want to live with joy. So it's not like, okay, let's sit down and park in a place of misery and self-pity and pain and sadness. That's not what the Baal HaTanya is advising. We're going to learn how to process those emotions, but to ignore them, to make ourselves into people who don't feel, who are not bothered by objectively bothersome realities, that could lead to emotional dysfunction, and there's nothing holy about that. Okay, so after that question, which the Baal HaTanya does not answer till much later, but the question remains, how should we see ourselves? Now the Baal HaTanya tells us, Acha Inyan, the idea is that Kihine Matzinu B'Gemara Hechalukas. We find 5 different categories, 5 different labels, 5 different ways that we can see ourselves. And the Baal HaTanya is going to tell us them. I'm not going to read this inside. We have 3 primary ones: Tzaddik, Rasha, and Beinoni. Tzaddik, we commonly understand the word tzaddik to mean a perfect, righteous person, a person who could do nothing wrong. A Rasha is a terrible, evil person, a person who could do nothing right. And a Beinoni, we commonly understand a Beinoni to mean a perfect mix of perfect and terrible, a person who is sometimes perfect and sometimes terrible. And my own thought on this is that, pre-Tanya, without the Tanya, we thought we could either be perfect or terrible. We thought that being average means sometimes perfect and sometimes terrible. Our failures were shameful. Our mistakes were permanent scars. And this is obviously not a recipe for joyous, energized living. The Baal HaTanya teaches us that these labels are only technical terms to be used in context of assessing behavior. They're only used, Tzaddik, Rasha, and Beinoni, the Baal HaTanya says, is only at the end of this whole discussion about these words. The Baal HaTanya tells us these words are only a description of our behavior. They are not the definitive truth of who we are on the inside, of who we actually are, because we are much, much more than our behavior. We are actually more than anything that can be seen or touched on our external selves. So what's the answer? So who are we? So how should we see ourselves? Okay, so if we shouldn't see, so we're going to throw out those words, Tzaddik, Rasha, Beinoni. Beinoni is something that we're going to learn, that we want to aspire to, but we're going to throw out the commonly understood definitions of those words. We're no longer going to define ourselves as Tzaddik, Rasha, or Beinoni, meaning I'm a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad person, or an awesome, wonderful, fantastic. If you listen to yourself talking, you might find that when your kids listen to you or your husband listens to you, you say, thank you, you're so amazing. And when they don't listen to you, you say, they're such an idiot, right? What about being regular? He takes out the garbage, what a tzaddik. Doesn't take out the garbage, what a Rasha. What a Rasha. It's like, whoa, we're either terrible or wonderful. And I don't know about you, but I know I do that to myself pre-Tanya. And we could all do that to ourselves. So that's not what we're going to do. And Beinoni is something we don't want to be, because who wants to be sometimes terrible and sometimes we all want to be, we all want to be a tzaddik. There was a lot of pre-Tanya. There's a lot of angst, a lot of confusion, a lot of self-hate, a lot of beating ourselves up, because if I'm not perfect, then I must be awful. And I don't want to be awful. So I'm going to determine myself. I'm going to think that I'm perfect. And if I'm perfect, I can't hear mistakes. Don't you dare criticize me, because if you criticize me, then I'm going to be awful. I'm going to be horrible. So this kind of thinking, this extreme labeling of ourselves is it's very toxic to our well-being. So we're going to learn a new set of definitions. We're going to learn a new meaning of the words tzaddik, Rasha, and Beinoni. But before we can acquire new understanding of what these words mean, we need to go a little bit deeper. We need to know what's going on inside of ourselves. And what's going on inside of ourselves is the fact that we have two completely different souls. Shtei nefashos. Achbir Inyan, the explanation of this is Al Pi Ma Shekasav Reb Chaim Vital Zechrenu Levracha, according to the writings of Reb Chaim Vital, that every single yid, the l'chol ish Yisrael, echad tzaddik ve'echad rasha, no matter what labels you put upon yourself, yesh shtei neshamas, we have two souls. Shehein shtei nefashos, they are two life forces. So in searching for an answer to the question of how to see ourselves, we first need to see what is going on inside. We need to know our spiritual anatomy. And that is that we are driven by two completely different forces. Our two different forces are not just parts of ourselves. They're like two completely different engines. Our psyche and like our whole body actually is like a car. It's like one car with two drivers who are constantly fighting over the steering wheel and the brakes. Okay, here's my own thought on what's going on what's coming up next. Okay, in this chapter, after the Baal HaTanya tells us that we're going to the explanation of all of this, of understanding how to see ourselves, we're going to reach that understanding, that insight, that appreciation through first examining and exploring what our inner spiritual anatomy, right? My own reflection of that is like, we use the words good and bad very easily. And because we're measuring value, I want to take a minute to reflect about that. Okay. Sometimes we say something is good, something is bad. And we say those words, we throw around the words good and bad as if their meaning is absolute. And the truth is that the meaning of good and bad is never absolute. In fact, each of us attaches value to different things in different ways. There's no universal understanding of good and bad in the world. Obviously, there's a moral compass that everybody agrees that life is good, and that, everybody agrees that certain things are good, but actually even those definitions are eroding. The Baal HaTanya, but we still use those words as if we all agree on what's good and bad, right? The Baal HaTanya introduces us to an entirely new paradigm of how to measure value. This perfectly simplistic paradigm gives us so much clarity. I love it. It's so clear. It liberates us from confusion, from self-doubt, and from self-hate. It liberates us, because when this paradigm becomes our personal measuring system, we're very well on our way to the goodness we want in our lives. I'll give you an example. I was recently speaking with somebody, and she is a little bit different from her family in terms of her dress. Let's say they only wear, a certain kind of tights, and she wears a different kind of tights, or they don't wear certain kind of makeup and she does wear certain kind of makeup. So in her education, good is in the box, bad is out of the box. So if I wear makeup, I must be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad person. And I may as well be Machal Shabbos, Chas v'Shalom, because I'm anyways a bad person. I'm not going to anyways, I'm either good, I'm either in the box or I'm not in the box. Now I'm sharing with you a very, very extreme example. But, you know, we do it to ourselves. If I look at myself, I am a messy person. As I say I'm a messy person, I'll casually drop my shirt that I just took off onto the floor instead of hanging it up in the closet because I'm a messy person. So it gives me permission to do messy things and engage and indulge in messy behaviors. So we want to be very careful about how we use the words good and bad. And in fact, we want to be very careful about how we use any negative, unproductive, and destructive, ugly, shameful, blameful, toxic labels, because they really could be disempowering to ourselves and to our children, to our husbands, to anybody in our life. Negative labels could be very toxic. The Baal HaTanya gives us a whole different paradigm for how to measure value. And I think if we stick to this value system, it is so clarifying and liberating. What's the Baal HaTanya's paradigm for measuring value? He says, he doesn't say this straight out now in this parak, but it comes up a little bit later, but I'm bringing it up here. I'll tell you why in a minute. In the Baal HaTanya's book, in the Baal HaTanya's perspective, there is only one value, and that is Hashem. There's only one goodness, and that is Hashem. There's only one truth, and that is Hashem. Hashem is the one and only true value and goodness. So from that perspective, anything that is connected with Hashem's truth is valuable and therefore desirable. And anything that is disconnected from Hashem's truth is other to valuable and is therefore undesirable. So in making a decision, instead of thinking of ourselves, if this is good, this is bad, and we never want to do anything bad, and we always want to do good, which leads us to so much confusion and cloudiness and, you know, people pleasing and a lot of stuff that could really get in our way of wholesome, energized living. We can take on this paradigm. Is this of the Baal HaTanya? Connection to Hashem? Great. Disconnection from Hashem? Not for me. Connection to my neshama, to truth, to value, to living with more awareness of Hashem and the preciousness of my neshama, I'm in. If it doesn't coincide, if it contradicts Hashem's truth, or if it contradicts the truth of my dignity, my worthiness, my neshama's empowerment, my neshama's beautiful light, it's not for me. It doesn't belong to me. Okay, that was my introduction to now we could understand when we talk about the animal self, because we're going to do this now, okay? We're going to meet the first in this chapter 1, we're going to meet the first of our two animal selves, of our two souls. We're going to meet the first of our two souls, and that is known as our nefesh habahamis, our animal self. You're asking, we quoted the Baal HaTanya as saying that somebody who says, I can consider myself a Rasha, which is objectively not an ideal situation. I could consider myself a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad person, and I won't let it bother me. It does not bother me. Okay. Now that is what the Baal HaTanya says. What I'm personally understanding from that is what makes a person able to say, I am a Rasha, meaning I'm a bad person and I don't care. For a person to be able to say that, that means they are switching off their emotions. I'm not going to let it bother me. I will just not care. Apathy is the beginning of many disasters. It's spiritually dangerous. Now, this truth about turning off our emotions, the Baal HaTanya is talking about the danger of turning off our emotions to a negative label. My personal understanding is that it's not just dangerous to turn off our emotions about a negative label. It's also dangerous because the rule that the Baal HaTanya is saying, if you have realities that you say it's bad, but I don't care about it, if we make ourselves into such a person, that is spiritually dangerous, not just in reference to our view of ourselves as a good person or a bad person, but also in view of everything else in our lives. In terms of like, if we can say, well, the Golos is really terrible, but I don't care. Someone else is poor, but it's not my business. You're crying, but it's got nothing to do with me, so I don't care, right? If we do that, if we shut off our emotions, it's spiritually and emotionally dangerous. So you're asking, isn't it true that it's impossible to ever be disconnected from Hashem? So how is this paradigm serving us? Especially if we consider ourselves to be disconnected, then that makes us further. The Baal HaTanya is saying, look, there's two things. There's truth and there's our experience of the truth.
Right.
The truth is, a Yid could never and will never, it's not possible to disconnect from Hashem. It's
right.
impossible. At the same time, that's the truth. From our experience, my best example for this is the sun is shining, and that's the truth. It's shining, and it will shine, and there's nothing I could do to stop the sun from shining, but there is something that I could do to stop myself from experiencing that sunshine. I could pull down the window shades. So yes, a Jew can never disconnect from Hashem. Right. None of us, there's nothing we could do that could disconnect us from Hashem, and yet we could engage in behaviors that makes us experience a state of disconnection. Right, perfectly. You said it very, very well. Thank you. We could turn down the dial, or we could amplify our connection with Hashem. Thank you so much. You said that beautifully. Of course, truth can be experienced in many different ways, but there's only one truth. The Torah, all of Torah has one singular truth, and that's the truth of Hashem. So it's not a contradiction. Okay, so let's explore from this understanding of what is good and bad, and in other words, throwing out the old definition of good and bad, where it's just objective, and taking on the Baal HaTanya's perspective of good and bad, being connecting or disconnecting. Now let's go into exploring what is our animal self. For those of you who are following along in the notes, I am on Erev 6, where the Baal HaTanya says, Nefesh achas achbir in l'chol ish Yisrael echad tzaddik ve'echad rasha yesh shtei neshamas. We said that already. T'chsiv v'neshamas and Asisi. Shehein shtei nefashos. These are two life forces. Nefesh achas mitzad haklipa v'sitra achra. Our first soul, our first driver, our first life force is from the side of Kalipa and Sitra Achra. It's from the other side, and it's a shell. It's a peel, a shell. Now, before we look at this, most people, if you're new to Tanya, when you hear the word Kalipa, you think of long green nails and a monster, okay? In the Baal HaTanya's book, Kalipa means a shell, a covering, something that covers up the truth. Now, a peel has a double function. Two things that it does is it hides and protects what's inside of it. So too, right, if you have a peel of an apple, the peel protects the fruit, so it stays white and delicious and juicy and clean, and it also hides the fruits. Until you take off the peel, you cannot see the fruit. But this is not a bad thing. It actually is a good thing because it protects the cleanliness and the freshness of the fruit that's inside of it. So too, the Baal HaTanya uses the word klipa to express the hiddenness of Hashem, because Hashem has hidden himself in this world. And the outside of his hiddenness, there is a layer of a peel. It's like the whole world is covered in peels. Whenever we're peeling fruit for Pesach and peeling those potatoes, as I sit and peel a case of potatoes and another potato, always think about how the whole world is covered in a peel of concealment, concealing the truth of Hashem. But this peel that covers Hashem's presence in the world serves two functions, and that's why the Baal HaTanya specifically uses the word peel, and probably why the Zohar also uses the word peel, klipa, a shell, because it's a double function. Yes, it conceals, and from that perspective, it can seem unpleasant and negative and, awful. At the same time, it also protects what's inside. Because the reason why Hashem covered himself in this world is so that we will choose Hashem despite his hiddenness, despite the existence of that covering. And when we make that choice, we allow Hashem's truth to shine forth with greater intensity, right? Because when we take off that klipa, when we take off the shell, when we take off the peel of an apple, now you can enjoy the fruit much better than if there would never have been a peel. So too, when we remove that layer, when we get past the layer that hides Hashem's presence and we choose Hashem, we are allowing Hashem's truth to shine forth with much greater intensity, the intensity of light that shines forth from the darkness. And in that sense, the klipa is not necessarily a bad thing. We'll discuss later that there's two forms of klipa, one a removable peel and one is a peel that cannot be removed and therefore is not for us to play with. But for now, the Baal HaTanya says that our animal self is made up, it's comprised of, it comes from the side, the other side. It comes from the side of klipa, and it comes from klipa and the other side. And again, we spoke about good and bad and the others. I want to bring that into this definition of the other side because it's a word that the Baal HaTanya will use a lot. So again, good or bad may be subjective. And that's why the Baal HaTanya does not use those words. The Baal HaTanya never says that the nefesh habahamis, our animal self, is bad or good. He doesn't use those words. The Baal HaTanya uses a unique paradigm, right? We said the one and only good is Hashem. Everything else we're going to describe as relative to that truth. So our nefesh habahamis, it's not good, it's not bad. It comes from otherness. It's other to the truth of Hashem. It's not proclaiming Hashem's truth. So it's on the other side of that truth. It's on the other side of the value and desirability that comes with exposure of Hashem's truth. From here on, throughout the Tanya, the Baal HaTanya frequently uses the word ra, evil. Now, I know this from previous times that we've done Tanya in person. Spiritually sensitive people are very sensitive to the word evil. It triggers it triggers a lot of shame and unpleasant emotions. When we hear the word evil, our mind paints pictures of sinister monsters and creepy ugliness, right? In the Tanya, the meaning of this word is entirely different. It doesn't mean monsters. It doesn't mean long, green, creepy nails. It doesn't mean murderers, thieves, or, bad people. In the Baal HaTanya's paradigm, the only good is Hashem and connection with Hashem. And from this perspective, evil means disconnection from Hashem, and evil also means the possibility of disconnection from Hashem. So Sitra Achra, where's our Nefesh HaBahamis? It's on the other side of Hashem's exposed presence. It's on the other side of Hashem's truth. I'm up to number 8, a continuation of the Baal HaTanya's description of our Nefesh HaBahamis. V'hi hamislabeshes be'edam ha'adam lahachiyos haguf. This life force, our animal self, is enclosed in the blood, in our blood, and it gives life to us. And that's why our animal self, because it's part of our blood, it's embedded into our blood, and it's charged with the energy, the possibility. It gives us our physical life. Our animal self is our drive to perpetuate our physical life. It's to perpetuate our physical life, and ultimately it's also that part of us, we'll see soon, that pursues all comfort and pleasure to magnify and perpetuate that life for itself. Umimena ba'is, and from our animal self comes kol hamidos ra'is me'arba yisodos ra'im sheba. Again, from this animal self comes all 4 animal elements from which we get all our, and I translate it as our disconnecting impulses, because the animal self is commonly understood to mean, it's not bad, it's an energy that could be transformed. It's a potential. It's a possibility. Yes, it has the possibility for connection. for disconnection, but it also has the possibility for profound connection with Hashem, for transformation, for greater energy. So that's why I translated the word ra'is. It's bad. In the Baal, according to the Tanya, bad here means it's our disconnecting impulses. So let's go through those 4 elements because they're very, very fascinating. Our animal self is the part of us that gives us our basic human impulses and tendencies. And the 4 elements are as follows. First, we have fire. Fire rises above. Fire is always rising upward. It's the only physical existence, the only physical creation that rises up. Fire within us is the drive to rise and the drive to burn passionately. From the element of fire, we have the drive to inflate our ego and to see ourselves as better than other people. And this is also our drive to get angry, because from pride comes anger. How dare you insult me? How dare you disrespect me? How dare you do that, right? We get angry when we're not elevated and respected. This is also our drive to invest ourselves with burning, with burning passion. That's our fire. Water is the drive to indulge in pleasure, because water gives birth to all of pleasures. Water is what makes everything in the world grow. So water is the drive that we have to indulge in pleasure. This is our drive to pursue comfort and avoid discomfort by any cost. This is our drive to keep our habits flowing in our established patterns. Even when we dislike our habits, we are driven to keep those habits going. I don't like that I eat ice cream every single day, but I'm going to keep doing it because my water, I'm driven to stay in my comfort zone, to not change, avoid the uncomfortable work of changing my habits and my thought patterns. That's water. Wind is our drive to blow nothingness. From the element of wind, we have our drive to waste time. Nobody ever here wastes time, right? Somebody said a really good line recently. They said, killing time is suicide on an installment plan. Killing time is suicide on an installment plan. I love it. So from the element of wind, we have our drive to waste time as we drift off into meaningless pursuits. This is our drive to disengage from meaningful pursuits and instead fly off into nothingness. And sometimes that nothingness could be wild. Sometimes it's our drive to indulge in what we're going to call fun and laughter in a way that keeps us disconnected from Hashem. It's not meaningful fun. It's just, let me get out of here. Let me escape, right? What's the difference between a holiday and a Yom Tif? We're coming up to a Yom Tif of Hanukkah. What's the difference between a holiday and a Yom Tif? The Goyim also have holidays, lahavdil. What's the difference? A holiday is an escape from reality. Let me go off. Let me go with the wind. I'm going to have a vacation. I'm going to do something that I never get to do. I'm going to escape a little bit from my regular life. A Yom Tif is a time to get deeper into reality, not escape from reality, get deeper into reality and get new strength to deal with our reality from a place of greater strength and greater light. In this case, it's a greater possibility for miracles and beautiful light. So wind is our drive to blow nothingness. And then earth, the last of our 4 elements, is the drive to sink into laziness or sluggish sadness, because earth is heavy. So anything that pulls us down comes from earth. This is our drive to procrastinate, to feel stuck, to feel disempowered, self-pity, depressed. I'm not talking about clinical depression. This is our drive towards lethargic inertia and a depressing attitude, self-pity. I am miserable. I was miserable yesterday. It can't get worse, but I'll be an optimist and I'll say it could get worse. That's the wind. That's the earth in us. Now, my own reflection on all of this is so fascinating. All of the above qualities sound so ugly. They sound so, my goodness, I don't want to have those things. I don't want to be lazy. I don't want to be the kind of person who just wastes time in meaningless stuff and just, tries to escape reality with a kind of fun, wildness, and not disengaging. I don't want to be a person who's in constant pursuit of comfort and pleasure and who's deathly allergic to discomfort. I don't want to be a person who gets angry just because somebody wasn't so nice to me. I don't want to be that kind of person. But you know what? Guess what? Hashem made us this way. All of these qualities are a natural, inherent part of who we are. We're wired with so much potential for disconnection. So there's no shame in having these impulses and these tendencies, just as there's no shame in having fingernails. Maybe my face is prettier than my fingernails, right? But I'm going to embrace my fingernails because it's part of my body. It's part of how Hashem made me. So too, I might like my kindness better than I like my tendency to do kindness, better than I like my tendency to procrastinate, my tendency to be messy, my tendency to be lazy, my tendency to get into a bad mood. So, but still, we want to embrace all of ourselves, because in our commitment to connect with Hashem and with our neshama, these weaknesses give us the opportunity for deeper connection. Remember, it's like a peel. Just like the peel of the fruit that hides and protects the fruit, these weaknesses, yes, they hide our inner light. They conceal the beauty, the majestic, unstoppable light of our neshama, but they're also springboards from which that very neshama will shine forth with greater intensity. Think about it. If you are feeling lazy, the only way to get past that laziness is to push yourself. And where are you going to push yourself from? You're pushing yourself from a deeper place inside of you, a place that's deeper than your laziness. And if you never felt lazy, you never had to push yourself. If we naturally feel sorry for ourselves, if we naturally feel like a piece of dust, like a shmata, like a nothing, like earth, from the earth component in us, we feel like we're down, we're stuck, we're helpless, we're pitiful, we're nebachtike victims, right, of our life circumstances and challenges. If we feel that way, the only way we could get past that is if we dig deeper inside of ourselves and find that wellspring of dignity, of courage, of compassion, of strength, of empowerment that is deeper than that shell, that's deeper than that peel of all that we are experiencing in our consciousness. We have to dig deep into our subconscious and unleash that deeper light. So you see what I'm saying, how this klipa is both a concealment. In that sense, it's challenging at times, but it's also the impetus, it's the springboard from which our inner light will shine forth with much greater strength and intensity. Another thought on this, it's very interesting. We're doing the first chapter of Tanya. This is actually this information is on the second page of the entire Tanya, the second page of the first chapter in Tanya. And it's interesting that the very first piece of information, amongst the very first piece of information we're learning, is that we are wired for a strong possibility for disempowerment and disconnection. It's like, why? Why is that? So my own thought about this is that when a wise friend is giving you directions, they tell you about the possible dangers along the path, right? Without this awareness, it's like you're going to go down the road, you're going to see there's going to be those stick figures that blow a lot of hot air. It's going to jump out at you. It's going to, don't worry. It's nothing. Just go walk right past it. You're going to pass by a corner. It's going to look like you missed the exit, but you didn't. Keep going. The exit is right there. People will tell you what unpleasant potholes and obstacles to look out for along the way, because if not, without this awareness, if we would meet up with those with those dangers or the cloudiness or the uncertainty, we could be frightened by them or even hurt by them. But knowing about them in advance makes all the difference. It's the difference also between walking in the darkness or walking in the bright sunshine. In the darkness, if there's a pit, you fall right into it. In the darkness, if there's an obstacle, if there's a stone, you trip over it. We have no idea that it's there. We have no idea what it is. And that just increases our fear, and it increases our possibility of being hurt by it. So too, if we wouldn't know about our Nefesh HaBahamis, if we wouldn't know about these four elements and our possibilities for all these unpleasant emotions and all these tendencies, which if left untended, they become tendencies that be left untended. Interesting. If we let loose, if we just don't even bother trying to rein in our tendencies and impulses, we create toxicity in our lives, right? But without knowing about it, how could we put a leash on it? How could we control, how could we contain it? How could we harness that energy for the good if we don't even know that it's there? So that's why the Baal HaTanya, my own understanding is, that's why I feel like it's right before, right in the beginning of our journey, one of the first things the Baal HaTanya wants us to know is that there are a lot of messy stuff inside of you. There's a lot of possibilities for disconnection. You've got a lot going on there, and you might think it's ugly, but don't worry. It's the very space where you will grow, where you will shine. Like a shell covers the fruit, this possibility for disconnection, these weaknesses, these apparent weaknesses are actually your greatest strengths. From here, you will grow. From here, you will shine forth with much greater intensity and strength and beauty. So in the sunlight, what the Baal HaTanya is doing, he's turning on the light, telling us what's going on inside of us. This is what you have here. You have the fire, you have the water, you have the wind, you have the earth, you have the Sitra Achra, you have the Klipa. This is what's going on inside of you. A lot of messy stuff. Don't worry about it. He turns on the light. And in the sunlight, we can see how the obstacles on our road can support our safe passage and can even become the impetus, the springboards for greater growth. The one more point I want to conclude with, and then we'll open up to more questions, is that our animal self also includes our natural moral inclination. You know, it says that Bnei Yisrael are goyim lechachmanim, baishanim, and goyim lechasadim. These tendencies, our moral inclination towards compassion and kindness for others, is also from our nefesh habahamis, from our animal self. Because again, our animal self is not bad, it's not good, it's possibilities, and it's our inherent nature. So that's the end of what my thoughts on Perek Aleph. Emir Hashem, next week we will continue with Perek Beis. For all of you who are listening and are not here now, you can send in your questions to Shterna at energizedliving.org. That's SHTERNA at energizedliving.org. I would also appreciate hearing your feedback about if we went too fast or too slow. It will be helpful to know how it was for you and what we could do to make it more, a better learning experience, for a more connecting learning experience for everyone. I want to wish you a wonderful Shabbos and a good week if you need to go. But if you'd like to stay, I have another couple of minutes. We can open up to more questions. So you're trying to categorize this, the other side, as bad versus good. And what the Baal HaTanya is saying is we're not using those definitions. This is just potential. It's neither bad nor good. Passion and anger could actually be used in a beautiful way. The potential for wind, potential for pride, the potential for fire, the potential for even depression. We're going to be using this as springboards for tremendous growth. If you categorize it as potential, natural self, it's everything. It's our fight or flight instinct is part of our animal self. You're seeing all of those as bad, and you're saying compassion and kindness are good. But if you see all the common denominator between compassion and anger is that they're natural. It's a huge difference because we're so used to labeling ourselves as good and bad and relabeling other people as good and bad, labeling everything by good and bad. We're not going to do that now. We're going to be connecting it, we're labeling as connecting or disconnecting. And all these qualities have no labels. It's just our natural self. There's no label. It's all potential. And the fact is that we do have all these qualities. And it's so important to be comfortable with our humanness, because the minute we're comfortable with it, we can now work with it. We can now grow from it. The reason why it's important to know that we're wired like an animal is because we need to know how low we can go, and at the same time, how high we can go. But this is our default. If we're not gonna work on ourselves, we could easily fall into a toxic mode of behavior. We could invite a lot of dysfunction into our lives because we have it. There's a potential for it. Now, doesn't mean
Right.
that doesn't mean that we should park there. Yay, so I'm a nasty, obnoxious, egoistic maniac, narcissistic, whatever, right? I'm going to park here and I'm going to live my life. Too bad on everyone else. This is how Hashem wired me. No, because Hashem also gave me an neshama. And every moment, that ultimately the answer to the question, which we didn't talk about today, but the Baal HaTanya's question in the beginning is, how should we look at ourselves? And ultimately, we are choosers. And we are empowered to choose our better self, our awesome self. It's so important to know that this is our possibility because, yeah, we have it in us. So there's no shame in having in it. There's no avoiding it. You don't have to deny it. And we could, I feel like for me, this personally, it liberates me. It's okay. Now I could, because it takes 100% of our energy to focus on making healthy, meaningful, productive, beautiful choices in our lives. And if part of our energy is invested on covering up the shameful parts of ourselves, our unpleasant tendencies, our messy emotions, I'm gonna use the word what you use, our animalistic self. Yeah, if there's a part of us that's fighting with it and just arguing with it and denying it and needs to cover it up, then we don't have the energy to work and to choose and to live. Yes. Yeah, I make mistakes. Yes, I have the possibility to make much worse mistakes. It's okay. This minute, I'm going to make a better choice. I'm going to repeat your question because it's so great. Is the Baal HaTanya going to give us guidance in how to get out of all this mud and all this stuff that we're talking about here? And the answer is 100% yes. This is a step-by-step guide into not only how to get out of this, but to live with absolute empowerment, unstoppable, beautiful light showing up in every moment. That's what this is. It's a step-by-step guide for not just getting over it, but being over it, like really, like living with beauty, with a lot of beauty and empowerment and, shining light. So I'm very excited about it.